Keep polishing the boardroom table and try not to be seen, Miranda Roth said, eyes on her watch as a flock of suits hovered. We have a client arriving in 10, and I don't need a mop in the shot. Elena Marlowe tucked her rag, felt the sting, and kept moving along the mahogany edge. Heat will haze the finish if those carafes sit there, Elena said, voice even. And if your client is Dr. Aaron Cole, he hates glare. Angle the blinds or he'll ask to move seats. Heads turned. The assistant froze mid-pour. Quick note before we start. If you love the exact moment power flips on the people who look down on you, subscribe now. This story hits hard and fast, and I don't want you missing the reveal when it lands. I didn't ask for an opinion, Miranda snapped. Just make it shine. Elena steadied the bucket against her shin. Calm, unshakable. She adjusted one blind string, then placed a folded coaster at the 12 o'clock edge of the table where the camera lens would live in every memory. She wasn't here to win anyone's approval. She was here because rent sat like a weight on the kitchen counter, because Maya's permission slip for the science fair waited for a signature, because bus timetables were less forgiving than people. The gloves chafed between her fingers. The citrus cleaner stung in her throat. She thought about the syllabus she once revised by lamplight, about the student who learned to read trend lines by tracing them with a pencil. The elevator bell chimed down the corridor like a metronome ticking away someone else's power. Elena pressed a palm flat to the table, feeling for grit no one else would see. Somewhere in the building's bones, the HVAC kicked and settled like a patient falling asleep. Set the bottled water at room temperature, she told the assistant softly, not as a challenge, but as a kindness. Cold shocks the palate, dulls the coffee. You want his head clear, the assistant blinked, nodded despite herself, and adjusted the tray. Don't take instructions from the janitor, Miranda said, louder now, so the suits would hear it. The art on the wall, brushed steel, a loop of capitals infinity, caught the overheads and threw brightness back on Elena's rubber soles. Outside, a black sedan nosed up to the curb. Phones surfaced, postures lengthened. Elena moved to the head chair and centered it exactly 2 fingers from the rim, the way he used to prefer a lectern. Far enough to breathe, close enough to commit. She allowed herself one quiet breath, not of pride, but of readiness. She had built whole semesters on the promise that clarity arrives for those who prepare while others posture. If he recognized her, fine. If he didn't, that was fine too. The work was the work. Down the hall, the lobby's marble carried the rhythms of arrival. Heels in triplet meter, a baritone laugh, the rolling suitcase's small applause. 10 seconds, someone whispered. He's here. Miranda's smile sharpened like a blade meant for fruit, but aimed at people. Everyone, she said. Positions. Elena lifted the bucket, the water sloshing quietly against thick plastic. The handle dug into her palm. A blunt reminder that strength sometimes looks like staying. She glanced at the slide on the wall monitor. Q4 projections. A slope that climbed too clean. The CAGR label wore an extra decimal it didn't deserve. She did the math without meaning to. The way a violinist plucks a string while dusting the case. It would only take one question from the right mouth for that perfect line to wobble. She placed the bucket behind the credenza and smoothed the rag along the edge one last time. Move, Miranda said as the door opened. Elena stepped aside, body small but spine straight. The room inhaled. Aaron Cole entered like someone who had learned to be looked at and had learned not to care. Navy suit, tired eyes, a scar at the temple she remembered from a bike fall he'd turned into an analogy about risk. He shook hands, accepted compliments, let the camera shutters flicker like moths. His gaze skimmed the table, the chair, the blinds angled to cut the reflection from the downtown glass. It kept traveling, past the stainless loop of art, to the back of the room, where Elena had made herself unimportant. It found her anyway. A flash of recognition sparked and was gone in the same breath, as if he'd seen a word in a language he used to speak. He didn't break the choreography. He didn't need to. But his shoulders dropped half a degree, the way they had when he'd finally understood diminishing marginal returns. Elena felt the old classroom settle somewhere behind her ribs. Chalk dust, winter light, students who survived statistics by holding onto a railing she'd bolted to the wall. She blinked it away. Not now. Now was polish and posture and the quiet knowledge that numbers don't save anyone if the story they tell is a lie. Where are you watching from? She would have asked the invisible audience of people who understand the grit under polished surfaces if they'd been allowed into this room. The story would be theirs, too. She wheeled the empty bucket out into the corridor, giving the table to its performance. Behind her, Miranda's voice took on that expensively trained warmth. "Dr. Cole, you'll find everything perfectly prepared." Elena smiled to herself. A private, calm line of thought. Perfect is fragile. And today, the wrong person had been chosen for a public slight. There would be no scene, no grand speech, just the slow unmasking of a truth no polish could hide. Elena's footsteps echoed softly in the corridor as she wheeled the bucket away, the scent of lemon cleaner clinging to her gloves. Behind the door, laughter and greetings swelled, then muted to the low hum of introductions. She slowed near the service elevator, listening without leaning too close, letting her presence dissolve into the wallpaper. Years of walking the quiet edge of rooms had taught her that silence often revealed more than noise. Through the seam of the door, she caught Miranda's voice, polished and deliberate. "At Rothbridge Capital, Dr. Cole, we anticipate your needs before you even articulate them. Our team is built on foresight." Elena almost laughed, though the sound never left her chest. Foresight, she thought, staring at the scuffed floor tiles, is not buying bottled water at the wrong temperature. Foresight is watching people closely enough to know what steadies them when nerves fray. The bucket handle pressed against her palm as she shifted weight. She thought of Maya's science project sitting on the counter back home, the papier-mâché globe she had painted with continents too bright to be accurate. "It spins," Maya had whispered with delight, setting the toothpick axis into motion. Elena tightened her grip. That globe needed to make it to school next week, and that required her paycheck to clear. Dignity could wait. Survival could not. The service elevator rattled open, and Elena stepped in, pressing the button for the basement. The descent smelled of oil and warm steel, humming like an old cello string. In the stillness, memory crowded in. The lecture hall, chalk between her fingers, Aaron Cole leaning forward at the back row, desperate to understand. She had seen him fail 3 exams before, had recognized the bruising silence of someone who didn't believe he belonged. And she had told him, plain as truth, "You do belong, but belonging takes work." He had believed her then. The doors opened to the utility floor, where concrete corridors spread like veins beneath the building's polished heart. Elena parked her bucket by the sink, peeled the gloves from her hands, and rubbed the raw creases at her knuckles. The soap dispenser sputtered as she pressed it, water running cool and unbothered. She looked at her reflection in the spotted mirror, tired eyes, hair pulled too tight, uniform that smelled of bleach. She almost didn't recognize herself. But beneath that, she knew the same patience, the same mind that once dissected global markets, lived quietly. Upstairs, the boardroom hum shifted. She could feel it in the building's vibrations, voices rising and falling in rehearsed cadence. Miranda's tone climbed like a violin pushed too hard. "We've prepared exclusive models for your portfolio, Doctor. Cole, let me show you the trajectory." Elena could imagine the glossy crafts, the exaggerated lines. She dried her hands, listening harder, almost willing her old student to question what didn't add up. But she knew the performance. Wealthy clients distracted with surface polish. Distracted enough not to check the math. Her chest tightened. Aaron had learned differently. He had learned to look beneath the surface. The elevator chimed again, and one of the assistants appeared, heels clicking on the bare cement. She's startled at seeing Elena. "There you are. Miss Roth said she doesn't want anyone coming near the boardroom until she calls." The words were sharp, but her eyes were uneasy, as if she already knew the chaos Miranda's polish couldn't cover. Elena simply nodded, pulling her gloves back on. "Understood." When the assistant left, Elena leaned against the cinder block wall, steadying her breath. She wasn't angry. Anger was wasted fuel. She was preparing. If Aaron recognized her fully, it would happen naturally. If not, the truth had a way of surfacing when the numbers themselves betrayed the story. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from Maya's teacher. "Reminder. Science fair entries due next Thursday. Please confirm participation." Elena exhaled slowly, fingers hovering above the screen. She typed back, "Yes, confirmed." She's ready, because Maya was ready, and Elena would not let her fall short. Voices carried faintly through the vents, louder now. She could make out Aaron's tone, deeper than when he was a student, but still carrying that edge of earnestness. "These figures, something feels overstated." A silence followed, brief but heavy. Elena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of inevitability. He had seen the flaw. He would press. Miranda's reply floated down, sugary but defensive. "Our models are state-of-the-art, I assure you. Sometimes the scale can look dramatic." Her words trailed off into the static hum of the ductwork. Elena smiled faintly. Aaron was questioning her, and Miranda was scrambling. That was the first crack in the polished surface. She pushed away from the wall, gathering the bucket again. Preparation was everything, and she had already prepared by noticing details others ignored. The blinds, the water temperature, the seat distance. Small things that shaped perception. Soon, it wouldn't be her whispers shaping the room, but the unshakable truth of what Aaron remembered. The elevator doors closed behind her, carrying her back toward the lobby's bright glass. As the floor numbers climbed, she thought of her own unfinished lectures, of standing at a chalkboard with a room of students doubting themselves. She thought of Maya, bent over a globe she had painted with love instead of accuracy. And she thought of Miranda Roth, smiling with sharpened teeth at a man who already knew what belonged in a story and what didn't. When the doors opened, Elena stepped into the quiet hallway outside the boardroom. The hum of conversation seeped beneath the door like light through shutters. She positioned her bucket neatly, gloves folded over the rim, and waited. She wasn't there to interrupt, not yet. But the building itself seemed to hold its breath, as if aware that someone had polished a surface too smooth for lies to stick. Inside, Aaron's voice rose again, steady and questioning. The victory strategy had already begun its slow climb, though no one upstairs understood who had set the stage. Elena did, and she would not have to announce it. The truth would arrive on its own legs. Inside the boardroom, Aaron's steady voice carried through the thick wood door, rising above the polished cadence of Miranda Roth's pitch. Elena stayed in the hallway, close enough to feel the rhythm of the exchange, the vibrations brushing against her chest like faint thunder. She leaned casually against the wall, mop handle balanced in her hand, outwardly indifferent, but inwardly tracing every syllable. The bucket at her feet seemed almost ceremonial now, an object of dismissal, yet quietly present at the very door of power. Miranda's laugh rang sharp, a little too loud. "Dr. Cole, perhaps you're overanalyzing the details. Our projections reflect confidence. That's what you came here for." Assurance. Elena heard the shuffle of paper, the rustle of a suit sleeve. Then Aaron's voice again, calm but unyielding. "Confidence is one thing. Accuracy is another. I've seen markets collapse on projections. Like these." Elena felt a flicker of pride. The same pride she used to hide at the back of lecture halls when a struggling student began to catch on. She crouched, dipped the rag into the bucket, and wrung it out slowly, as if her patience could echo upward through the cracks of the ceiling. In the vents, the murmur of assistants rose, whispers trading nervous energy. The door opened suddenly. One of the junior staff slipped out, phone pressed to her ear, eyes darting. She nearly bumped Elena and frowned. "You're still here? Didn't you hear the directive to stay away from this floor?" Elena wiped the rag across the bucket's rim, voice low and steady. "Floors don't clean themselves." She didn't look up, but the assistant's shifting weight told her the answer had landed with unexpected weight. The girl muttered something about unnecessary presence and hurried down the hall. Elena remained, invisible, yet unshakable. She could sense Miranda struggling now, her voice tightening, every syllable weighted with impatience. "We've brought you the best our analysts have to offer, Doctor Cole. If that's not enough..." She paused, the pause of someone losing footing. Then came Aaron's answer, quieter. But Elena caught it clearly. "It's not about enough. It's about trust." The air seemed to thicken. Trust. That word didn't belong to Rothbridge Capital. It belonged to classrooms where faith in potential was currency. To nights when Elena had written recommendation letters by lamplight. Trust was what had carried a lost student into confidence, what she had spent years investing in people like Aaron. Her heart tightened, not with longing for recognition, but with the gravity of knowing she had once been the foundation of that word for him. She wiped her hands on the towel tucked at her waist, the citrus sting faint in her nose. She could wait. Recognition didn't need to be forced. It arrived in its own time. Often when the cracks grew too wide to ignore, the boardroom door creaked open again. And this time, Miranda herself stepped into the hall, her heels striking with practiced authority. She caught sight of Elena and grimaced as though the sight were an insult. "Why are you loitering here? Go downstairs. This level is restricted." Elena met her eyes, calm and unhurried. "I'll move when the table doesn't need me." Miranda scoffed, leaned closer. "You don't belong anywhere near this meeting. Do your job quietly, or I'll make sure you don't have one." The words were meant to cut, but Elena only nodded once, deliberately slow, then resumed wiping the rim of her bucket. She didn't need to respond. Time itself was on her side. Miranda glared a moment longer, then returned inside, shutting the door with a snap that rattled down the hallway. Elena exhaled, not shaken, but steadier, as if each insult laid another stone in the foundation of her composure. She remembered Maya's laugh when paint splattered her cheek, the fierce little girl's insistence that even crooked lines belonged on the globe. Dignity wasn't optional. It was inherited, passed from mother to daughter in small, quiet acts of endurance. Minutes stretched. The muffled tension from inside sharpened. Fragments of phrases slipping through. Inconsistent margins. Unexpected volatility. These don't align. Aaron was pushing harder now, peeling back the layers. The more he pressed, the thinner Miranda's polish became. And then, clear as if whispered in Elena's own ear, Aaron said, "This reminds me of an exercise I was once taught. Look beneath the surface, question the angle of the line, and you'll see what's hidden." Elena froze, rag in hand. That was her phrasing, nearly word for word, from a lecture years ago. He remembered. Not perfectly, not consciously enough yet to attach her name. But the echo was there. She leaned against the wall, heartbeat steady but strong. The victory strategy was no longer distant. It was unfolding in real time, piece by piece. Aaron's questioning wasn't random. It was built on the foundation she had once given him, a foundation Miranda could not possibly predict or match. The sound of chairs shifting, pens tapping nervously against glass, filled the silence after his statement. Miranda's voice broke in, defensive and sharp. "That's irrelevant. Let's stay focused on the opportunity." But the room didn't sound convinced. Elena could hear the hesitation, the uneasy stirrings of witnesses beginning to doubt the narrative. Doubt was the seed. Truth would be the bloom. She lifted her bucket, water sloshing gently, and began to walk down the hall, her steps unhurried. She wasn't leaving, just circling, giving space for what needed to happen. The smell of expensive cologne drifted from the lobby, mixed with the faint metallic tang of the elevators. She thought of chalk dust again, the way it clung to fingers even after washing, impossible to fully erase. Some marks, like truth, refused to vanish. Behind her, Aaron spoke again, firmer this time. "Show me the raw data." The boardroom fell silent. Elena smiled faintly at the hallway's sterile floor tiles. He was dismantling them, piece by piece, using the very lens she had once handed him. The reveal wasn't here yet, but it was coming. And when it arrived, no polish, no projection, and no title would protect Miranda Roth from the weight of it. The demand hung in the air like a struck bell. "Show me the raw data." Elena paused mid-step in the hallway, fingers tightening around the mop handle. Through the door came silence, the sort of silence that stripped veneers from polished words. Miranda Roth's reply was delayed, a fraction too long. "Dr. Cole, our summaries are designed to simplify complexity. Raw data is cumbersome. It doesn't serve the purpose of a strategic meeting." Elena closed her eyes briefly, recalling her lectures. She had said the same phrase countless times, but with the opposite meaning. Raw data serves truth, and truth is the foundation of trust. To hear Miranda twist it, strip it of honesty, stung like acid. Aaron's voice cut back, calm but insistent. "I'll need to see it." Without transparency, there's no point moving forward. His tone carried the authority of a man who had once doubted himself and learned to stand on solid ground. That, too, Elena recognized. The air in the corridor grew heavier. The faint vibration of shuffling chairs reached her ears, and she could picture it perfectly. Executives exchanging worried glances, assistants fumbling through binders. Miranda, still smiling, but with eyes that flicked too fast. She had been challenged in her own territory, and the room was watching. The door cracked open again. One of the assistants slipped out, clutching a tablet to her chest. She nearly collided with Elena and stopped short, annoyance flashing. "Don't just stand there. Do you mind?" Elena stepped aside, her voice quiet but steady. "Raw data doesn't clean itself either." The assistant frowned, confused, but hurried down the hall, shoes clicking a frantic rhythm. Elena remained where she was, her mop propped against the wall. She wasn't invisible anymore. Not really. Not to herself. The strategy was unfolding, even if no one else could see it yet. Aaron was dismantling the illusion, brick by brick, and every phrase he used had the faint echo of her classroom in it. Inside, Miranda's voice rose sharper now. "Dr. Cole, surely you trust the credibility of Rothbridge Capital? We wouldn't risk your time with anything less." The performative warmth was thinning, replaced by impatience. Aaron didn't waver. "Credibility comes from evidence, not reputation. Let's see the numbers." Elena leaned her shoulder against the wall, her heartbeat a steady drum. She thought of Maya's globe again, the continents, painted too bright, but placed with care. Accuracy mattered, but intention mattered more. Maya had built something to the best of her ability, and Elena would defend that spirit against a world that valued polish over honesty. The hallway lights flickered faintly, the hum of the building's ventilation, whispering through ducts. Elena bent, wrung the rag dry, and laid it across the rim of the bucket. Her movements were deliberate, quiet symbols of patience. She had always believed real change didn't require shouting. It required steadiness until the truth became impossible to ignore. The door swung open suddenly. Miranda stepped out, face tight with irritation. She didn't glance at Elena this time, too absorbed in her phone. "Get me the sheets," she hissed into the receiver. "Now, and make sure they look clean." She disappeared back inside, perfume trailing like a weapon. Elena's lips curved faintly. Look clean. That was the problem. Data wasn't meant to look clean. It was meant to be clean, and Aaron would know the difference. A few minutes later, the boardroom erupted with overlapping voices. Someone muttered. Someone else tried to soothe. Aaron's voice cut through, firm. "This projection doesn't align with market conditions. I know because I studied the exact variables that drive this curve. It's not a mistake. It's a misrepresentation." The phrase struck Elena like lightning. Exact variables. That was her phrase, one she had drilled into her students during case studies. To hear it again, resurrected in this battle, told her everything. Aaron hadn't forgotten. He might not have connected the dots yet, but her teaching lived inside his argument, guiding him through the confrontation. She straightened, her mop standing tall against the wall. The victory strategy was advancing, even if unseen. Her expertise had already reached into the boardroom, delivered by the very man Miranda was desperate to impress. The assistant returned, flustered, thrusting a stack of papers at Miranda. The door cracked wide enough for Elena to glimpse the scene. The polished table, executives leaning forward, Aaron studying the sheets with practiced focus. His brow furrowed, then lifted as realization set in. He tapped the page with his finger. This is exactly the kind of thing my professor warned me about." The words struck the room. They struck Elena harder. There it was, the first true leak of her reputation, spoken unknowingly by the very student who had carried it all these years. Her chest swelled with something fierce, half pride, half vindication. Miranda's face blanched, though she tried to recover. "Professor, I'm sure your education was fine, but this is business." Aaron shook his head, firm. "No, it's the reason I'm in business at all. She taught me to see past polish, past convenience. Without that, I wouldn't be here." The silence that followed was sharper than any insult Miranda had thrown. The executives shifted uneasily, eyes darting between Aaron and their CEO. Doubt was spreading, undeniable now. Elena stepped back into the hallway shadow, her breath slow and measured. The reveal was not complete yet, but the stage was set. Her name hadn't been spoken, but the shape of her influence was carved clearly into Aaron's words. She picked up the mop, its handle smooth against her palms, and resumed her quiet work. To anyone passing, she was still a janitor, still invisible, but she knew better. The cracks in Miranda's armor had widened, and truth was pushing its way through. And when it came fully into the light, there would be no denying who had set it in motion. The mop slid across the hallway tile, each stroke deliberate, steady, as if Elena were brushing dust off more than floors. She could still hear the echo of Aaron's words. "This is exactly the kind of thing my professor warned me about." The phrase hummed in her chest, powerful and fragile at once. He hadn't spoken her name, not yet, but he had opened the door wider than Miranda Roth could ever close. Inside, voices shifted, executives murmuring, chairs scraping. Miranda's clipped tone cut through the noise. "Dr. Cole, I assure you, our firm prides itself on integrity. Any resemblance to academic phrasing is coincidental." Elena almost smiled. Coincidental. That was the kind of word people used when the truth pressed too close. She leaned her mop against the wall, adjusting the bucket so it wouldn't spill, and tilted her head toward the door. Every muscle in her body was tuned to the rhythm of the conversation. Aaron didn't let the comment slide. Coincidence? Number? It's the framework I was taught. Precisely. My professor drilled it into me, and it saved me more times than I can count. Whoever prepared these numbers forgot to check for correlation drift. That's not foresight. That's negligence. The word landed heavy. Negligence. Elena exhaled slowly, feeling the building itself absorb the blow. She imagined Miranda's smile faltering, her executives glancing at one another, suddenly unsure whether their confidence was misplaced. The door creaked open again, and another assistant hurried out, clutching a laptop, her expression pale. She darted past Elena without a word, heels hammering against the marble like a retreating army. Elena's eyes followed her, but her hand stayed folded calmly in front of her apron. She thought of Maya's school project. Bright paint streaked across her fingertips, the determination in her daughter's eyes. Maya had once said, "Even if it wobbles, it's still true." That spirit lived in Aaron now, willing to challenge, to name negligence for what it was. Miranda's voice rose again, sharper, trying to reclaim ground. "Dr. Cole, I believe this line of questioning is derailing our purpose. We're here to secure a partnership, not audit textbooks." Aaron's laugh was quiet but audible. Partnerships don't survive on Polish. They survive on trust. If your models can't withstand scrutiny, then perhaps Rothbridge Capital isn't the right fit. The silence after those words stretched long. Elena placed her rag neatly over the mop handle, every motion precise, an anchor against the storm brewing inside the room. This was the moment she had known would come, the first real fracture in Miranda's perfect facade. But it wasn't Elena who had struck the blow. It was Aaron, echoing her teachings without even knowing she stood a few feet away. And then, unexpectedly, her discovery began. The door cracked open once more, just wide enough for Aaron's voice to drift into the hallway. "Funny. My professor used to say the same thing about partnerships. She told us, if someone fears the raw numbers, they're not worth your time." The executives inside murmured, unsettled. Miranda snapped, "Enough with these irrelevant comparisons." But Aaron pressed on. "Irrelevant? Number. That professor was the only reason I passed her course. The only reason I believed I belonged in this field. She taught me to trust numbers, not appearances. She taught me to question everything." Elena froze, her breath catching. The words weren't just an echo now. They were testimony. Her influence was being spoken aloud, not by her own lips, but by a man whose success proved her impact. And the room heard it. This was the reputation leak method unfolding. The revelation wasn't complete, but the seed of her identity had spilled into the open, unexpected, and undeniable. The janitor polishing tables outside had suddenly become linked to a professor of influence inside. Miranda's response trembled with controlled rage. "Dr. Cole, you're not here to glorify old teachers. You're here to make decisions. Let's keep our focus, professional." Erin's voice softened, though it carried more weight than hers. Professionalism begins with honesty. That's what she taught me. That's what I expect. Elena leaned back against the wall, eyes closed for a moment. Every humiliation she had endured in silence, every dismissal and cutting remark, felt lighter now. She wasn't invisible. Not really. Her past had entered the room before her body did, and the people Miranda wanted to impress were now carrying her truths into the spotlight. She opened her eyes and glanced at the bucket, the water inside reflecting the ceiling's fluorescent lights. The surface shimmered, slightly disturbed by the vibrations of voices above. That was what truth looked like. Ripples spreading outward, impossible to contain. The assistant returned, laptop still clutched tight, and pushed past Elena with a scowl. "Move this thing," she muttered, kicking the mop bucket. The water sloshed dangerously. Elena steadied it with one hand, her gaze steady on the girl. "Careful," she said softly. "Spilled water warps wood. And no polish fixes that our assistant blinked as if she'd been spoken to in a language she didn't fully understand, then hurried on. Elena exhaled slowly, centering herself. Her strategy didn't require force or volume. It required patience, quiet endurance, and the certainty that truth had already begun its march. Inside, Erin spoke again, firmer now. "I want to meet the people who prepared these models. I want transparency before I commit to anything." Miranda's voice wavered. "That won't be necessary." But Erin cut her off. "It is necessary. Otherwise, this conversation ends here." The executives gasped audibly, the weight of his words sinking in. Elena's chest tightened, but not from fear. This was the climb. The reveal was not yet complete, but the scaffolding was built. And she knew, with unshakable certainty, that the moment was coming when Erin would see her. Not as a janitor in rubber gloves, but as the professor who had once given him the lens to dismantle lies. The room behind the door vibrated with unease, voices overlapping in low tones. Erin's firm insistence anchoring the noise. Elena stood in the hallway, one hand still resting on the mop handle. The words from Part 5 lingered. His demand for transparency, his refusal to be pacified by polish. The echoes of her classroom teachings were no longer whispers. They were active instruments cutting through Rothbridge Capital's facade. She adjusted the bucket so it wouldn't roll, her movements unhurried. To any passerby, she was just a janitor tending her tools. But inside, the revelation was already blooming. Erin had connected trust to his professor's lessons. He hadn't said her name, not yet, but reputation had leaked into the boardroom like sunlight through a cracked blind. Miranda Roth's voice rose suddenly, brittle but loud enough to be heard. "We don't have time to coddle nostalgia, Doctor. Cole Rothbridge Capital operates at the highest level of expertise. If you want transparency, I'll provide it, but not with interruptions about irrelevant professors." The dismissal stung Elena, though she didn't flinch. Irrelevant. That word had followed her since she traded lecture halls for bleach buckets. But the irony was rich. The very truth Miranda feared was born from those irrelevant lessons. Erin responded, his tone sharp but steady. "It's not nostalgia. It's relevance. She taught me that without honesty, numbers are worthless. And if you think that's irrelevant, then maybe this conversation should end." A hush fell, heavy and long. Elena closed her eyes, letting the weight of his defense settle inside her chest. He didn't know she was there, but he defended her presence all the same. The door opened again, and an executive stormed out, sweat gleaming at his temple. He nearly collided with her, muttering curses. When he saw the mop, his face twisted in irritation. "You're in the way." Elena stepped aside, her voice calm. "Funny. Thing about being in the way, sometimes it's because the path is crooked." The man stared, confused, then shook his head and marched down the corridor. Elena lowered her eyes again, hiding the faint smile tugging at her lips. Inside, Aaron pushed harder. "Bring me the raw numbers now. I'm not signing anything until I see them." Chairs scraped, papers shuffled. A new silence followed, one that vibrated differently. Less confidence, more fear. And then Miranda's voice, quieter, laced with venom. "Very well. You'll get them. But I hope you realize you're undermining a company that has built its reputation on trust." Aaron's reply was immediate. "Reputation isn't built. It's earned. That's what my professor taught me. And right now, yours is crumbling." The words struck like a gavel. Elena's grip tightened on the mop handle, her pulse steady but strong. He remembered more than she thought. His phrasing, his conviction. It was hers, carried forward, sharpened by his own journey. And then came the turning point. The crisis trigger method of discovery. A sudden commotion erupted inside. Papers rustling, voices rising, a monitor flickering. An assistant yelped, "The spreadsheet isn't loading, it's corrupted." Elena's instincts flared. She knew that tone. Panic when systems failed under pressure. Years of academia had taught her how fragile technology became when truth pressed too close. She stepped toward the door, compelled to act. Miranda snapped, "Fix it! Now!" But the assistant stammered, I can't. The formulas are breaking. The cells won't align." Aaron's voice sharpened. "So even your data can't stand up to scrutiny." The silence that followed was thick with exposure. And in that silence, Elena took a step inside the doorframe, not entering fully, but visible now. Mop in hand, uniform stark against polished wood and glass. Heads turned. A few executives frowned, as if to shoo her away. But Aaron's eyes caught hers. For a flicker of a second, recognition sparked, tentative, but real. Miranda's gaze snapped to Elena. "Out! Now! This is none of your business." Elena stood still, calm, and unshaken. "Spreadsheets don't break themselves," she said softly. "It's usually the formula." A misplaced cell. A hidden assumption no one checked. The assistant froze, staring at her. "That's exactly what's happening." Aaron's eyes narrowed, the spark of memory deepening. He leaned forward. "Wait. Say that again." Elena held his gaze, her voice measured. "Numbers don't lie. But people do. Sometimes without realizing. If you check the assumptions, you'll find where it broke." The room went utterly silent. Aaron's breath caught, and then his eyes widened. "That's what you told me. Years ago. When I failed my second exam, you said the same thing." The recognition slammed into place. Elena didn't smile, didn't gloat. She simply stood there, mop in hand, the embodiment of quiet truth. Miranda sputtered, "She's a janitor. She doesn't belong here." Aaron's voice cut through like steel. "She belongs here more than anyone. She's the reason I am who I am. She's my professor." Gasps rippled across the table, executives glancing between them, the weight of revelation crashing down. Miranda's face blanched, her authority crumbling in real time. Elena stepped back, her posture calm. The reveal had arrived. Not shouted, not staged, but born from crisis. The very moment Miranda wanted to control had become the stage for Elena's truth. Aaron rose from his chair, looking directly at her. Professor Marlowe, I thought I'd never see you again. Elena inclined her head, steady as stone. And yet, here we are. The room shifted, power tilting with quiet finality. Miranda's empire of Polish had fractured, and the truth stood tall in rubber gloves and a janitor's uniform. The silence that followed Aaron's words was thick enough to drown in. Executives exchanged nervous glances. Assistants froze with pens hovering midair. And Miranda Roth's smile had vanished entirely. Only the hum of the overhead lights filled the void. Elena stood near the door, mop in hand, her figure incongruous against the gleaming boardroom table. Yet in that moment, she carried more authority than anyone seated inside. Aaron held her gaze, conviction firm in his voice. This woman isn't just a janitor. She's Professor Elena Marlowe. She taught me everything I know about questioning numbers, about searching for truth. Without her, I wouldn't be sitting here. The words struck Miranda like a blow, though she scrambled to mask it. That's absurd, she snapped, eyes narrowing. A professor? Here? Cleaning floors? Her tone dripped with disdain, but there was a tremor in it, fear creeping through the cracks. Elena's expression didn't change. Life isn't as linear as your projections, Ms. Roth. Sometimes the line bends, but the truth remains. Aaron leaned forward, pointing to the corrupted spreadsheet on the monitor. And she's already proven her insight. She spotted the flaw before anyone else could name it. If she says there's an assumption buried in here, I believe her. Murmurs rippled across the table. One of the junior executives whispered, If she's right, this could explain why the model doesn't hold. Another added, and if she really taught him. Their voices carried uncertainty, and that uncertainty was poison to Miranda's authority. Miranda slammed her hand on the table, silencing the whispers. Enough. We don't need lectures from the cleaning staff. This meeting is about business, not charity. Aaron's eyes hardened. This meeting is about integrity. And right now, your numbers don't have it. But she does. Elena could feel the balance tilting, subtle but undeniable. The reveal had cracked open, Miranda's facade, and now the tide of perception was shifting in plain sight. Still, this wasn't about basking in recognition. It was about pushing the truth forward until it could no longer be dismissed. She stepped closer to the table, her mop steady in her grip like a staff. The spreadsheet failed because someone forced a curve to fit a story. If you let me look at the raw cells, I can show you where it broke. Gasps followed. An executive coughed awkwardly, clearly unsettled. Miranda's glare could have burned steel. Absolutely not. You don't touch company files. Aaron rose from his chair, calm but immovable. If you won't let her look, I walk. And when I walk, Rothbridge loses my investment. The room erupted in tension. Papers shuffled, executives protested, assistants stared wide-eyed. The possibility of losing Aaron was unthinkable, and Miranda knew it. Her face drained of color, though she tried to recover. You'd risk millions on the word of a janitor? Aaron didn't hesitate. No. On the word of the professor who gave me the tools to succeed. The woman who taught me to never ignore the cracks. The silence that followed was devastating to Miranda. Elena could almost hear the sound of her empire creaking under the weight of disbelief. This wasn't just about numbers anymore. It was about credibility. One of the executives cleared his throat timidly. Perhaps letting her take a look wouldn't hurt. If Dr. Cole trusts her, maybe we should— Out of the question, Miranda barked, her voice breaking with desperation. Elena set her mop carefully against the wall, then folded her gloved hands in front of her. You're afraid of what the truth will show. But it's already showing, Miss Roth. every minute you resist, you prove his point. Miranda's chest rose and fell sharply, her fists clenched at her sides. For the first time, she looked smaller, her authority diminished by the calm woman she had mocked minutes ago. Aaron straightened, his tone final. I won't invest until she examines the data. My decision is made. The weight of his ultimatum crushed the room. Executives who had once whispered support for Miranda now avoided her gaze. Assistants clutched their tablets nervously, waiting for instruction. Elena stayed silent, letting the moment stretch. Her strategy had never been about forcing recognition. It was about allowing truth to rise naturally until no one could deny it. And now, the truth sat in the air like an immovable stone. Miranda's mask cracked. Her voice dropped to a hiss meant only for Elena, though everyone heard it. You think you're clever, but this is my boardroom, my company. You don't belong here. Elena's reply was soft, steady. Belonging isn't claimed by power. It's earned by truth. And the truth is already in this room, whether you like it or not. The executives shifted again, glancing at one another. Their loyalty, splintering. They had come to impress Aaron, but now their confidence wavered in the shadow of Miranda's unraveling. Aaron turned back to Elena, his voice gentler. Professor, if you're willing, I want you to review it. Not for me, for everyone in this room who needs to see the difference between polish and reality. Elena inclined her head. If that's what you want, I'll do it. Miranda exhaled sharply, fury radiating from her. But she said nothing. She couldn't. The tide had turned, and she was powerless to stop it. Elena retrieved her mop and bucket, tucking them neatly against the wall, as if to remind herself of where she stood now and where she had once stood before. Two lives balanced on either side of her, but for the first time, they didn't feel like contradictions. They felt like proof. The boardroom was no longer just a stage for numbers. It was a battleground for truth. And Elena Marlowe, once dismissed as invisible, was stepping into the fight with quiet certainty. The boardroom's polished air had shifted, no longer smooth and confident, but jagged, splintering under pressure. Elena stood at the edge of it all, mop set aside, her posture composed but unmovable. The executives, once confident in Miranda Roth's performance, were now restless, shifting in their chairs, their trust cracking. The projector screen glowed with corrupted cells and broken formulas. Silent proof that something beneath the surface was wrong. Aaron Cole broke the quiet, his tone firm. If you want my partnership, you'll allow Professor Marlowe to look at the data. Otherwise, there's no deal. The word professor cut through the air like a blade. Executives glanced at one another, their skepticism thinning into reluctant respect. Miranda clenched her jaw, her nails digging into the glossy table surface. She had always ruled with certainty, with polish, with status. But those tools were useless against the stubborn solidity of truth. Elena stepped closer to the table, not hurried, not timid, but steady. If you're willing to give me access, I can identify the flaw. It won't take long. Her voice was even, without arrogance, yet it carried more weight than the rehearsed pitches that had filled the room minutes earlier. Miranda barked a bitter laugh. Do you all hear this? A janitor claiming she can fix what trained analysts built. This is beneath us. But Aaron's reply landed hard. No, Miranda. What's beneath you is pretending a polished surface replaces honesty. If she says she can find it, I trust her. The room stirred, executives murmuring again. One of the younger analysts spoke timidly. If she really was his professor, she might see something we missed. Miranda shot him a look that could freeze glass. But the damage was done. Doubt had spread, and Elena's presence had become undeniable. Elena leaned slightly toward the screen, eyes scanning the frozen columns and error messages. Even from a distance, she could already see the pattern, mismatched assumptions, figures forced to align with projections that didn't hold water. It was exactly the kind of trick she had warned her students against years ago. Her voice was calm, instructive, almost like she was back in her lecture hall. This error isn't random. The formula was forced to fit a story. The raw numbers tell a different one. If I had the laptop for 5 minutes, I could show you. Aaron gestured firmly toward the assistant clutching the computer. Give it to her. The assistant hesitated, eyes darting to Miranda. Miranda's lips thinned, her silence sharp enough to cut. Finally, Aaron repeated, now. Reluctantly, the laptop slid across the table to Elena. She accepted it with care, setting it gently on the table as though handling something fragile. Her gloved fingers hovered for a moment, then she peeled the gloves off, folding them neatly beside her. She pressed the trackpad, scrolling through sheets with the familiarity of someone who had lived in data for years. The room watched, silent, as she navigated the file. The quiet clatter of keys sounded louder than any speech. Within moments, Elena stopped, tapping one cell with precision. Here! The growth rate assumption was copied from a favorable quarter and pasted across years where it doesn't belong. It inflates every projection downstream. Gasps echoed around the table. One executive leaned closer, eyes widening. She's right. That's exactly what caused the break. Aaron's expression hardened, turning back to Miranda. So your strategy was to disguise a flaw with polish in hope I wouldn't notice? Miranda bristled, her voice icy. We simplified for clarity. All firms do. Elena closed the laptop slowly, her tone calm but unyielding. Simplifying isn't the same as falsifying. This isn't clarity, it's distortion. And distortion destroys trust. The room was silent, every pair of eyes shifting to Miranda, whose authority was unraveling thread by thread. Elena straightened, folding her hands calmly in front of her. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't boasted, but her presence filled the room nonetheless. Aaron nodded once, decisive. That settles it. If Rothbridge wants my investment, it'll be built on transparency. If not, I walk, and I'll take this story with me. Executives shifted again, some pale, some restless. None daring to side openly with Miranda now. The quiet balance of power had shifted, and everyone felt it. Elena stepped back, reclaiming her place near the wall. She didn't need to push further. Her words had already landed. The mop and bucket sat beside her, silent reminders of how far perception could fall from reality. She had come into this room invisible, dismissed as nothing more than the help. Now she stood recognized, not just by Aaron, but by every witness who had seen truth expose polish. She glanced once toward the door, imagining Maya at home with her globe, painting her crooked continents with pride. Everything Elena had endured, every humiliation, every dismissal, had led here, to this moment where quiet dignity carried more weight than money or power. Aaron's voice broke the silence, softer now. Professor Marlowe, thank you. You just saved me from making a mistake worth millions. And you reminded me of why I trusted your lessons in the first place. Elena inclined her head slightly, composed. All I ever taught was to look for what doesn't add up. You did the rest, the executives whispered again. Not about Miranda's pitch, but about Elena. Her name, her presence, her quiet authority. A shift had occurred that no projection could erase. She turned back toward the mop, lifting it calmly. The gesture was almost symbolic. She wasn't here to replace polish with prestige, but to remind them that truth lives in the overlooked details. She rested the mop against her shoulder, her voice quiet but firm. Numbers don't lie. People do. And now, everyone here knows the difference. The silence that followed was deeper than before, heavy with respect. Even Miranda had no words left. Elena let the moment settle, then looked briefly toward the invisible audience beyond the boardroom's walls. If you've ever been underestimated, you know what this feels like. Where are you watching from? Her eyes softened with quiet certainty. Stay with me. The real reckoning has only just begun. The boardroom lingered in silence, Elena's words echoing like a stone dropped into deep water. Executives stared at her as though they were seeing her for the first time. Not as a woman in a janitor's uniform, but as someone whose presence had reshaped the entire meeting. The mop rested against her shoulder, no longer a symbol of dismissal, but one of quiet authority. Miranda Roth sat rigid at the head of the table, her face pale beneath the weight of the revelation. She had built her empire on polish, on keeping people dazzled long enough to sign checks. Now, that polish had cracked, and the truth stood tall in work shoes and rolled-up sleeves. Aaron Cole broke the silence first. You asked me to trust Rothbridge Capital, Miranda. But it's her lessons that save me from making a blind mistake. Integrity is worth more than projections. A low murmur spread among the executives. Some nodded subtly, others whispered, their voices too low to catch. The balance of power had shifted in plain sight, and though Miranda sat in her expensive chair, it was Elena who commanded the room. Miranda slammed her hand down, rattling the crystal glasses on the table. Enough of this farce. She's not part of this company. She's a janitor. This is nothing but theatrics designed to undermine me. Elena's voice remained steady. Truth isn't theatrics. You tried to dazzle him with polished charts, but numbers don't bend just because you tell them to. They break. And everyone here just watched it happen. Aaron gestured toward the executives. You all saw it. She uncovered the flaw in less than 5 minutes. How long would Rothbridge have let me sign on inflated lies before admitting the truth? The executives avoided Miranda's glare, unwilling to defend her. One finally muttered, "The professor's right. If the foundation's crooked, the whole structure collapses." Miranda rose abruptly, her chair screeching across the floor. Don't compare a janitor's opinion to the work of my analysts. Aaron turned sharply. You keep calling her a janitor, but that's not who she is. You don't erase knowledge just because someone's circumstances changed. She's more qualified than half the people in this room. Elena let the storm roll over her, her composure intact. Her silence was louder than Miranda's fury. She thought of Maya, bent over her painted globe, insisting crooked continents still mattered. That was the lesson she had lived by. Crooked lines still carried truth, and truth outlasted arrogance. Miranda's voice cracked as she tried to rally. This is my boardroom, my company. Don't forget who signs the contracts. Aaron leaned back, unfazed. Contracts mean nothing if trust is gone. And after today, I can't trust Rothbridge Capital unless it starts with transparency and with her. All eyes turned toward Elena. She hadn't asked for the spotlight, hadn't demanded it, yet here it was, shining directly on her. She adjusted her stance, resting both hands calmly on the mop handle. I'm not here to replace your analysts or your board, she said softly. I'm here because you dismissed truth, and truth has a way of finding its voice. You can deny me, Mrs. Roth, but you can't deny what everyone here saw with their own eyes. The words settled heavy. Executives shifted uncomfortably, not daring to defend Miranda, not daring to dismiss Elena. Aaron looked around the table. So decide. Do you want to follow polish, or do you want to follow truth? Because I've already made my choice. Miranda's lips parted, but no words came. For the first time, her silence betrayed her defeat. She sat down slowly, shoulders stiff, unable to regain the authority that had slipped through her fingers. The assistant nearest the laptop cleared her throat nervously. Should we let her walk through the data? Just so we know? Aaron nodded once. Yes, let her, if she's willing. Elena inclined her head slightly, a quiet gesture of agreement. She didn't need to gloat, didn't need to raise her voice. The victory strategy was already advancing. Her hidden expertise had been revealed not by her own claims, but by necessity, by a crisis that forced the truth into the open. She stepped to the table, the laptop sliding toward her again. Fingers rested lightly on the keys, her mind sharp, her movements precise. She didn't perform for spectacle. She simply worked, correcting formulas, tracing assumptions, highlighting cells. Within minutes, the projections adjusted themselves, the inflated curves collapsing into sober lines. The room gasped collectively. The truth was undeniable now. The golden promise Miranda had sold was gone, replaced by a realistic picture, imperfect, but honest. Elena closed the laptop gently. This is the reality. Not pretty, not polished, but real. If you build on this, you build something that lasts. If you build on lies, everything collapses. Aaron looked around at the stunned executives. That's the clearest statement of value I've heard all day. Miranda's knuckles whitened on the edge of the table. She looked at Elena with a mix of fury and fear. You'll regret crossing me, she hissed. Elena met her gaze, calm and unbroken. The only regrets in life come from ignoring the truth. I won't be carrying that weight. The executives glanced at one another, their loyalty dissolving, their silence louder than any declaration. The tide had turned. Aaron leaned forward, his tone final. Professor Marlowe stays. Without her, I walk. With her, I'm still listening. Elena stepped back, reclaiming her place by the wall. The mop stood beside her once again, but no one in the room saw her as invisible anymore. She had become the axis on which the entire meeting turned. The reckoning wasn't over, but the battle lines were drawn, and Miranda Roth was no longer the unchallenged power in the room. Elena remained by the wall, mop standing sentinel beside her, as the weight of Aaron's ultimatum sank into the polished wood of the boardroom. Professor Marlowe stays. Without her, I walk. The declaration had landed like a thunderclap, and the silence that followed was thick with shifting loyalties. Miranda Roth sat stiff, her manicured fingers gripping the arms of her chair as though holding on to power by sheer force. Her executives avoided her eyes, staring instead at the glowing screen that no longer promised gilded futures, but sober, unpolished truth. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and fear. Elena's world and Miranda's colliding in the same breath. Aaron leaned back, calm, but firm. So, what will it be? The question wasn't just for Miranda. It was for the room, for every witness who had just watched Polish crack under the weight of substance. An older executive cleared his throat, voice cautious. If Dr. Cole insists, perhaps Professor Marlowe's insight should be welcomed. Another followed, murmuring. The revisions she made exposed flaws none of us caught. That's valuable. Miranda snapped her head toward them, fury flashing. You'd side with a janitor over me? The word landed sharp, but its sting had dulled. No one flinched this time. Elena didn't move, didn't answer. Her silence was a mirror, reflecting Miranda's desperation back at her. Aaron straightened, You can call her whatever you like, but I call her the reason I trust what I see. And trust is the only reason I'd invest. The executives shifted again, leaning subtly toward Aaron's certainty and away from Miranda's unraveling. The tide was no longer just turning. It had already turned. Miranda exhaled sharply, forcing composure. "Fine," she said, voice brittle. "If this is the circus you want, then let the janitor play professor. But don't expect me to indulge this humiliation for long." Elena finally spoke, her tone even. "The truth doesn't humiliate. It frees. If you can't accept that, the problem isn't with me, it's with the numbers." Her words landed heavier than volume ever could. A murmur of agreement threaded through the room, quiet but unmistakable. Miranda's jaw clenched, but she didn't reply. Aaron gestured toward Elena. "Professor, if you'd like, walk us through the corrected model. Show them what you showed me years ago. Why raw numbers matter." Elena moved forward, each step deliberate. She placed her hands lightly on the laptop, scrolling through rows of data with the calm precision of someone who had lived in these cells for decades. "Here," she began, "you'll see where assumptions were stretched. Growth rates pulled from favorable quarters, pasted where they don't belong. It paints a story, but not an honest one." Executives leaned closer, eyes following the lines of corrected figures. She tapped one column. "Reality isn't glamorous, but it's stable. Instability is what you build on if you want longevity." Her voice was steady, her words simple, yet they carried more conviction than the ornate graphs Miranda had paraded earlier. The room listened, not just because Aaron demanded it, but because truth rang in Elena's tone. She closed the laptop softly, folding her hands. "That's all I have. If you choose to ignore it, the cracks will widen until collapse is unavoidable." The room was silent again, but this time it was reverent. Executives sat straighter, as though bracing under the gravity of her words. Aaron nodded, his expression firm. "Thank you. That's exactly why I trust her." Miranda tried one last gambit. "Do you really want to gamble millions on a cleaning woman's word?" Aaron's reply was immediate. "No, I want to invest in a company that respects integrity. And today, the only person in this room who's shown it is her." The statement drew audible gasps. One executive whispered, "He's right." Another added, "Integrity is what investors will hear about after today. If she's connected to this deal, it changes everything." Elena stepped back, reclaiming her quiet space by the wall. She didn't need to bask in their shifting opinions. Recognition wasn't her victory. Dignity was. And in this room, before all these witnesses, her dignity had been restored. She thought of Maya at home, her bright continent spinning on a crooked globe. "Even if it wobbles, it's still true." Elena smiled faintly. Truth wobbled sometimes, bent under pressure, but it never broke. Miranda sat rigid, her silence betraying the collapse she couldn't conceal. For years, she had wielded power with polish and intimidation. Today, a janitor with a mop had undone it with calm expertise and steady truth. Aaron rose from his seat, turning toward Elena. "Professor Marlowe, I want you by my side as we move forward. Not because of titles, not because of appearances, but because you see what others miss. That's the kind of partnership I can trust." Elena inclined her head, her voice quiet. "I'll do what I've always done. Point out what doesn't add up. What you do with it is up to you." The executives whispered again, this time not about Miranda, but about the possibility of a future shaped by honesty instead of polish. The balance of the room had shifted entirely. Miranda had lost control. Elena hadn't just survived humiliation. She had turned it into vindication. The mop stood where she had left it, ordinary and unassuming. But now it was a symbol, a reminder that dignity can rise from the humblest corners and undo empires of pretense. Elena glanced at it once, then lifted her eyes to the boardroom. The reckoning wasn't finished, but the path ahead was clear. The mop stood silently in the corner, but the weight of the room leaned toward it, as though the object itself carried the memory of every word Elena had spoken. Executives whispered in low tones, the polished air of Rothbridge Capital now heavy with something raw, unvarnished, and undeniable. Elena had not shouted, had not forced herself forward, yet the room bent toward her, as if pulled by gravity. Aaron Cole remained standing, his posture commanding but calm. Integrity is the deciding factor. Without it, money means nothing. Professor Marlowe has proven that she sees what others miss. That's why my decision depends on her. The executives exchanged glances, their murmurs no longer whispers, but audible admissions. She's right about the formulas. We didn't catch it. If investors hear this story, the ripple grew, a tide turning against Miranda Roth in her own house. Miranda rose abruptly, her chair screeching across the floor like a protest. Her voice lashed out, brittle with desperation. Enough! This is my company. This boardroom doesn't belong to interlopers. She's a janitor. I will not stand here and watch her hijack my meeting. Her words rang loud, carrying out into the hallway where staff lingered, drawn by the storm brewing behind closed doors. Faces appeared in the glass wall, assistants, receptionists, even custodians on their break. The confrontation had become public. The humiliation Miranda thought she was hurling now mirrored back at her. Aaron's voice cut clean through the noise. She didn't hijack anything, Miranda. The truth forced its way in. You just refused to see it, Spectators outside pressed closer to the glass, their reflections mingling with the executives inside. Elena noticed them, but didn't falter. This was the moment public exposure sealed the arc. Her dignity restored not in secrecy, but before witnesses who had seen her, dismissed too many times. Miranda pointed at Elena, her hand shaking. You think you've won something? Standing there with your mop? This is Rothbridge Capital? Your place is the basement, scrubbing floors, not at the table with decision-makers. The words cracked across the room, but this time they landed hollow. Executives winced, assistants exchanged glances, and Aaron laughed, not cruelly, but with disbelief. Do you hear yourself, Miranda? You think power comes from belittling others, but the only one who looks small right now is you. Elena finally stepped forward, her voice quiet, yet cutting. You've built a kingdom on surfaces, Ms. Roth, but surfaces crack, floors warp, numbers break. What endures is truth, and you can't scrub that away, no matter how much polish you use. Gasps fluttered across the room, a sound of shock and recognition. Even the staff outside the glass straightened, their eyes wide with admiration. The woman they had walked past daily in silence had just dismantled their CEO with calm precision. Miranda's face flushed crimson. She reached for the laptop, but Aaron intercepted it, his grip firm. No more hiding, he said. No more spin. This company either faces the truth or it collapses under the weight of lies. And she, he gestured toward Elena, is the only reason I'm willing to give it a chance. Elena stood still, the weight of the moment pressing around her. She hadn't asked for applause, hadn't asked to be noticed, yet here it was. Recognition, not as a spectacle, but as vindication. One executive cleared his throat nervously. Professor Marlowe, if you're willing, would you consult for us? To make sure this doesn't happen again? Miranda's head snapped toward him, betrayal flashing in her eyes. But more voices joined. Her insight could save us. If Dr. Cole trusts her, maybe others will too. Better to have her with us than against us. Miranda's empire was collapsing in real time, not from hostile takeovers or market crashes, but from the steady unveiling of truth in front of witnesses who could not unsee it. Elena glanced once toward the mop in the corner, then back to the room. I'll do what I've always done. Teach people to see what's in front of them. Nothing more. Nothing less. Applause didn't erupt. But the quiet nods of agreement carried more weight than clapping ever could. The staff outside watched with pride flickering in their eyes. For them, it wasn't just about numbers. It was about dignity. Someone from their world had just proven herself in a room that had dismissed her. Miranda collapsed back into her chair, defeated but still seething. "This isn't over," she whispered, though no one seemed to hear her. The room no longer belonged to her. Aaron looked directly at Elena, his voice steady. "Professor, will you stand beside me as I decide this investment?" Elena's eyes softened, her answer calm. "I'll stand beside truth. That's all I've ever done." The witnesses outside saw it. The executives felt it, and Miranda could no longer deny it. Elena Marlowe, once invisible in rubber gloves, had been restored before the very people who had ignored her. The victory was not loud, but it was public, and that made it unshakable. The boardroom no longer felt like Miranda Roth's fortress. The steel artwork, the marble table, the crystal water glasses, all of it had been reduced to props in a stage where truth had taken center. Elena Marlowe stood steady, not triumphant, but dignified. The mop in the corner gleamed under the recessed lights, a reminder of where she had been forced to stand and of how far she had come back into the light. Aaron Cole remained on his feet, his voice firm. "Rothbridge can survive this, Miranda, but only if you accept that polish won't save you. Professor Marlowe just proved that numbers tell their own story, and no executive title can change it." Miranda's lips parted as though to retort, but no words came. The weight of the witnesses, executives, staff behind the glass, even Aaron's steady gaze, left her stripped of the veneer she had wielded for years. Elena's voice filled the space, calm and unwavering. "I didn't come here to humiliate anyone. I came here to work. But when you dismiss people, when you choose appearances over substance, the truth has a way of standing on its own. Today, it stood here." One executive cleared his throat, leaning forward. "Professor Marlowe, what you've done today saved us from walking blind. If you'd be willing to stay on in an advisory role..." Miranda slammed her hand down, her voice a bitter hiss. "You can't just hand my boardroom to a janitor." Aaron's reply came with finality. "It's not your boardroom anymore, Miranda. Not if the people in it no longer trust you." The executives nodded subtly, some reluctantly, some eagerly, but all of them shifting away from Miranda's crumbling authority. The power she had once commanded through fear was gone. Elena lowered her eyes briefly, gathering her breath. She thought of Maya at home, bent over her bright, crooked globe, smiling with pride. She thought of long nights spent cleaning offices after losing her place at the university, every insult endured for the sake of survival. And now, in front of those who had laughed, sneered, and dismissed her, she stood not as a victim, but as herself, whole, unbroken, undeniable. Her tone softened, though it carried. Titles change, circumstances change, but the truth is constant. That's what I taught in classrooms, and that's what I'll teach anywhere, even if it's here, in a uniform with bleach stains. The staff outside the glass exchanged glances of awe, some smiling, some blinking back tears. They had seen her walk these halls, invisible and overlooked. Today, she had given their invisibility a voice. Aaron extended a hand toward her. Professor, this story doesn't end with numbers. It ends with partnership. Will you help me build something honest from here? Elena looked at his hand, then at the mop leaning in the corner. She stepped forward, not to take his hand in triumph, but to meet him eye to eye. I'll help build only if the foundation is truth. That's the only partnership worth making. The room breathed with her words. The executives nodded again, some even clapping softly, though the applause was subdued. Reverent. Miranda sat back, shoulders slumped, unable to summon the strength to fight. The victory wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was written in the way people shifted their allegiance, in the way Aaron stood anchored beside Elena, in the way the staff outside now looked at her, not as a janitor, but as something far greater. Elena returned to her corner, lifting the mop once more. She didn't discard it, didn't shed it like a costume. She carried it with quiet pride, a symbol of where she had been, and a reminder that dignity didn't depend on what tools you held, but how you used them. She leaned it gently against the wall, turned to the room, and said softly, "The work isn't over. It never is. But today proves that truth doesn't need titles to be heard." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of recognition, full of respect, full of the quiet resonance of justice. Aaron nodded once, decisive. Then it settled. Elena gave the room one final glance before stepping toward the door. She could already hear Maya's laughter in her memory, already feel the weight of the globe spinning under her daughter's small hands. That was the future she fought for. Not boardrooms or contracts, but a world where crooked lines could still tell the truth. And as she stepped out into the corridor, every eye followed her. Not the mop, not the uniform, but her. Now it's your turn. What should the next story be called? Subscribe and don't miss our next story. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?